Hey everyone, and welcome to some more Reddit stories. This is on my second channel, so I hope you like the change. There will be a lot of Reddit stories coming to this channel, so go ahead and subscribe. But don't worry, I still have my other videos on my main channel. Anyways, yeah, again, subscribe, follow my Instagram, join my Discord, and let's get into these Reddit stories. These ones will really scare you. We resurrected a man who had been dead for 5 days. And he was followed by something from the afterlife. The dead aren't supposed to come back. This something was neither God nor the devil, though it came from what must be the closest thing to that great beyond from religious scriptures. Knowing what I know, I wish that I'd never been born at all, as that's the only way to escape it all. From the moment we come to exist, there's no way out, and I have been cursed for my sin of challenging nature to face the place that comes after death. A place already torturous enough for those who do play by the rules. But it'll be far more wretched for us. On January 31st, 2025, my colleagues and I witnessed an event unexplainable by the laws of nature, or at the very least, unexplainable by our laws of nature. By that, I mean that there are hidden threads which bind our reality together. Threads left unaddressed by even the futuristic science of this agency. Threads which bind us to other realities and places past reality. Threads of magic to our primitive minds. And I say all of these things as a biochemist, as a pragmatic man. I'm still an atheist. That's the worst part. You see, no religion accounts for what we experienced. Test subject 147 died on January 26th, and he was resurrected on January 31st. He was nobody special, an ordinary man who died in an extraordinarily terrible way during a hike. He tripped and struck his head against a rock, suffering a fatal head trauma. 147 was one of many recently deceased subjects entered into this medical trial, a trial orchestrated by my unnamed government branch. We were striving to conquer death, in a way, but this was less about achieving immortality and more about reversing tragic events, helping those who have died as the result of unnatural causes, such as 147's head wound. We utilized technology far beyond anything accessible within the modern world, the public world of machines and medicine. 147 was one of many subjects seemingly fated for failure. We worked tirelessly to revive the patient, but days passed, and his body decayed. Yet, we battled against nature, repairing damage to 147's skin, brain, lungs, heart, and so forth. Time was of the essence. After all, even our advanced scientific procedure had limitations. In any public hospital, you would be told, after a matter of hours, that a deceased patient could not be revived. But this wasn't a public hospital. It was an unholy place, and for our act of defiance against the natural world and that other place, my colleagues and I will all burn in a place darker than hell. I no longer think hell exists at all, in all honesty. I think it's a soft, cozy fantasy our ancestors invented to distract themselves from the real afterlife. Something far worse. I don't want to get bogged down by a tangent on various religious ideologies. I don't know whether any sacred text is right. All I know is that there exists something. I've seen it. Seen where souls go to rest. It exists beyond, below, above, and between the very atoms of our reality. That's why some still feel the presence of their deceased loved ones. After jolting upright at 7:17 p.m. on January 31st, Subject 147 didn't utter anything profound. All the man on the operating table had to say, well, rather scream, for himself was, "No!" A dozen Frankensteins gasped as they marveled at their creation. We were witches and wizards of science, eyeing 147 like a specimen in a petri dish, rather than a human being. By that point, 147 should have been a bloated corpse, but putrefaction had been stalled, undone even by the medical and technological sorcery of our doctors. Subject 147 was a medical marvel, no doubt about that, but we were forgetting that he was also a human, a soul. I speechlessly remained at the side of the room and gawped aimlessly as my colleagues rushed towards the table. Resurrection had always been the objective, but I'd only ever seen it as a hypothetical. I was struggling to accept the reality of the situation. Before Subject 147, no human on Earth had been clinically dead for longer than 17 hours. For good reason. The following transcript comes from video footage recorded on that day, evidence which, much like everything else I've told you, is classified. None of that matters now. Everything pales in the face of the great beyond. Subject 147. Where am I? Dr. Thatcher. Hello, Mr. Redacted. My name's Dr. Thatcher. This may be hard for you to understand, but you're in a, well, let's call it a private clinic. Subject does not respond. Dr. Thatcher, you're in shock, which is quite understandable, but I promise that you're safe. In fact, we just saved your life. Subject 147. No, I was dead. Dr. Thatcher pauses. Remarkable. Do you mind explaining how you know that? Mr. Redacted. Were you aware of your passing, so to speak? Subject 147. How am I here? Dr. Thatcher. Modern medicine and a team of highly trained specialists. We've been attempting to heal and revive deceased patients. Subject 147. But I hit my... Subject touches head wound. How did you fix... No. I shouldn't be here. I was gone for too long. I was gone for... Dr. Thatcher, 5 days, Mr. Redacted. Do you understand? This wasn't a standard resuscitation procedure. We healed your decay. We reversed death itself. This raises many existential questions, I'm sure, but I'm more concerned with science than philosophy. The mere fact that you're alive and talking is a miracle in itself. Subject does not respond. Dr. Thatcher, when we finally introduce this research to the scientific community, you'll go down in history. I know you don't fully understand, but... Subject 147. You keep saying that, doctor, but you're the one who doesn't understand. You shouldn't have brought me back. I keep telling you that I was gone for too long. Dr. Thatcher, I understand that this must be an incredibly stressful experience for you, Mr. Redacted, but I promise that you have nothing to fear. You're healthy. Your body was kept from... Subject 147. Do you want to know about my experience of death? Do you want to know what I saw? Dr. Thatcher, well... As I said, I'm a scientist, not a philosopher. I'm intrigued, of course, but it'll be for others to decide whether your memories should be called spiritual or psychological phenomena. I personally believe that, as your body shut down at the time of death, your brain will have fired. Subject 147. I'm not talking about my brain. I'm not talking about my body either. I'm talking about well, I don't know whether I believe in a soul. I just know I've been somewhere. A dark place between places, here but not here. Floating in the black, trying to scream, but having no mouth to release the sound. Having nothing but the dark and my thoughts. Dr. Thatcher, well, that'll be a fascinating conversation to have with religious and philosophical experts, but I'm a biochemist, Mr. Redacted. I'm more concerned with the Subject 147. With the science, yes, so you keep saying, but I'm telling you that I was somewhere, and as dark as that place may have been, there are darker places. I've seen them. Dr. Thatcher, speaking to Dr. Carlton. Go and fetch Dr. Rawls whilst I continue talking with the subject. Subject 147. My name is Redacted, and you're not listening to me. Dr. Thatcher, please calm down, Mr. Redacted. You need to watch your blood levels. Your body has endured massive trauma. When Dr. Rawls arrives, she's going to run some tests on you, check your bodily functions. In the meantime, I want you to know that I am listening to you. But you're not thinking clearly right now. As I said, that's understandable. You've achieved something that the human body shouldn't be able to do. Subject 147. Yes, finally we agree on something. Dr. Thatcher, for different reasons, it shouldn't be possible, but we made it possible. You made it possible. This will change humanity, Mr. Redacted. You'll come to see that once you've settled into your body, settled into living again. Subject 147. Oh, I'm not going to be here for long, Doctor. He won't allow that. Dr. Thatcher. He? Subject 147. And it will torture us all forever, Doctor. That empty place I described, it is nothing compared to the other place I saw. Dr. Thatcher. Right, I'm more than a little worried about your mental state, Mr. Redacted. But Dr. Rawls is on her way, and she'll tell us whether the machines are right, whether your body ticks the boxes. In the meantime, I'd like you to just lie back down and, as I said, remain calm. Of course, not all was transcribed. And certainly not all of the horror that followed. Firstly, the transcript doesn't account for the conversation I had with Dr. Glenfield. We were leaning against the room's sidewall, giving Dr. Thatcher and Subject 147 a wide berth whilst they talked. What do you think is wrong with him? Glenfield asked near silently, before nodding at the patient. I'd thought for a moment that she might be talking about Dr. Thatcher, and that made me smile slightly. I don't know, I replied. But none of this seems right, does it? The man's vitals are fine. Well, we should wait until Dr. Rawls has confirmed that, shouldn't we? She pointed out. I nodded. I suppose so, but everything seems to check out. His mental faculties should be fine. We don't know how he should be, Glenfield pointed out. This is uncharted territory, Doctor. Thornton, maybe the patient is right. You're not serious, I scoffed. I didn't picture you as the religious type, she tutted. This has nothing to do with religion. We've pushed the human body beyond its limits. Yes, we may have staved off the effects of decomposition, but it took us 5 days to resurrect him. 5. What if we've missed something? Something may happen to the human body after death. Something that leaves no way back. I shook my head and nodding at 147. He came back. Yes, but what about the long-term effects? She asked. What have we done to him? You wanted to be a part of this project, I said. I think I've changed my mind, she meekly stated, eyes swimming as they watched the haunted, blue-gowned patient on the operating table, the patient who refused to lie back down. Something isn't right with his face. Don't you see that fear in his eyes? I think anybody would be afraid in this situation, I said. It's only natural that, and then came a sound which cut into my thought. Its pitch was as impossible as this may seem, both low and high, both thunderous and shrill. Not two sounds, one all-encompassing sound, a piercing bellow which tore through the walls, the floor, and the ceiling of our operating theater, a sound accompanied by a shift in the air, as if something had darkened the room. But the lights did not flicker. The power did not cut out. Something heavy hung in the air. What on earth was that? A doctor cried as gasps filled the room. Dr. Thatcher raised his hands. Everybody, calm down. Remember, they're carrying out H-76 tests on the floor above us. That didn't just come from above us, another doctor replied amidst the low chatter. It came from everywhere. Subject 147 finished with a weak moan. It's here. Dr. Thatcher attempted to enforce normalcy and cohesion as people began to chatter nervously. Will somebody go and check on Carlton? She was supposed to bring Rawls. It shouldn't take them this long to walk down a corridor. Suddenly, Subject 147 stunned every doctor in the room by lunging towards the operating trolley, lunging without warning, towards the scalpel sitting tantalizingly in the tray. He managed to seize the sharp instrument, then turn his blade towards his neck, but a pair of residents succeeded in wresting the tool out of his hands. I wish they hadn't. Kill me! The red-eyed patient screamed as the two doctors struggled to hold him down, and froth flew from his screeching lips. Then Dr. Thatcher loudly announced, "Right, I need 147 restrained immediately, as he poses a threat to himself and others. Whilst you do that, I'm going to find Carlton and Rawls." The elderly chief spun towards the theater's main door, then he flung it open and exited the room. The white-haired, deep-wrinkled man grunted as he scurried away, fragile body clearly disapproving of his great hurry. As the door swung shut behind him, the doctor's rapid, clomping footsteps faded towards the left. Seconds later, a fresh series of clomps sounded from the right-hand side of the corridor. Then came a muffled shout, followed by the operating room's main door swinging back open. Dr. Thatcher stood in the entrance, eyes wide and uncharacteristically jittery, though that was mostly concealed by his glasses' misty lenses. But I saw it, saw that something had shaken the unshakable man, and this was the first thing to unsettle my gut. Thatcher shot his eyes towards Glenfield and me. "You two, doing absolutely nothing at the back. Yes, you. Come with me." Like scolded school children, we begrudgingly nodded our heads and followed our leader into a surprisingly dark hallway. In that moment, I suppose that there had been a power cut after all. Suppose that would have been the source of the almighty sound we'd heard, but I knew that didn't quite add up. "Should we contact someone about the lights?" Glenfield asked as the three of us headed down the unlit corridor, lit only by the glow pouring through the operating theater's long window. "Just follow me," Thatcher murmured, voice starting to lose its brutishness and stability, starting to crack. "I need to, The old man's voice disappeared as we slipped into the heaviest shadow of the hallway, the shadow through which I could no longer see anything. All sound faded into nothing, only for a moment, and then, as if my ears had popped at high altitude, the sound returned. Light returned too. Thatcher gasped, and Glenfield did the same. I, on the other hand, didn't manage to utter a sound. I was still struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. We were right back where we'd started. In a panicked state, the three of us didn't pause to think, didn't pause to talk. We dashed down the corridor a second time, welcoming the dark end of the hallway once again. We passed the operating theater, which we should have left far behind us, and followed that same corridor into the blackness, into the silence. Sound and light returned again. The operating theater returned again. "But we just ran in a straight line," Thatcher murmured as we staggered once more towards the room on our left, towards that window releasing an island of light into the black hallway. "We need to call someone," I croaked, brain stubbornly refusing to accept the truth of the situation, that we had impossibly found ourselves in a spatial loop. That dimly lit portion of the corridor was our entire reality, only 50 yards in length, most of which was lined, on the left, by that large glowing window. We were being beckoned back to the room. That was all that existed any longer. With a stammering voice, Glenfield said, I think we need to... I've no idea what she was about to suggest, as my colleague was silenced by the operating theater's light extinguishing, by our world's only light extinguishing, and it extinguished with the faintest click, as if somebody had simply flipped a switch in their home. With the death of that light, we found ourselves in total blackness. I heard fabric rustling, and then a phone torch cut through the darkness. Dr. Thatcher was lighting the corridor, revealing that we were only a few yards from the entrance to the dark operating theater. No longer a beacon of light, but a black hole that seemed even less inviting than the hallway. In spite of this, Thatcher inched towards the theater and Glenfield followed. "Wait," I began, but the door had already started to creak open, and the two doctors were shuffling into the room, the horribly silent room. So, I unwillingly followed and stood alongside Glenfield, peeking over Thatcher's shoulder at the large, oblong laboratory, a room 30 yards wide and 60 yards long. His phone's meager torch did not illuminate the entire space. It didn't even reach the operating table a mere 20 yards ahead of us. "Hello?" Our leader called, his voice no longer loud but wispy and frail, and there came responses, whimpers, so quiet that, much like the phone light, they barely filled the immense space. It was difficult to pinpoint the sound, but we shuffled across the room, and Dr. Thatcher eventually landed his torch beam upon our missing colleagues. 8 trembling doctors were sitting on the floor, huddling together against the theater's right-hand wall. Their eyes shot towards the glare of Thatcher's torch, and they all violently shook their heads from side to side. They seemed to be warning him to not make another sound. Even without seeing Dr. Thatcher's face, I heard the inhale, heard him prepare to speak. But thankfully, the man stalled when the sounds of squelching began. Sounds far more distinct than the muffled sobbing of our colleagues, and far easier to locate. Thatcher immediately cast his torch beam ahead towards the operating table. But the light once again did not puncture the darkness. The phone's torch was ineffective, of course, but it seemed that a black fog had also taken the room, as if we could simultaneously see less and more of reality. We pushed forwards until the beam finally caught the edge of the table, finally caught subject 147. The moment the light caught his body, the squelching ceased. We saw only 147's profile, and I was relieved to find that his face hadn't changed much. His eyes seemed more vacant, perhaps, but that was all. He was sitting up and looking towards the right-hand wall. But when Thatcher shakily shot his torch to the right-hand wall, the three of us exhaled in relief. 147 was looking at nothing at all, though I do still wonder whether, as Thatcher started to move the torch back to the left, I may have seen something. It lasted for no more than a quarter second, a black line, 3 curved prongs sprouting from its end that vanished into the air. It almost looked like a slim arm and fingers. But I had seen too much that I did not understand, and I didn't think I could handle any more. So I dismissed it. Dismissed it as a shadow cast by the torch, though that doesn't quite make sense. The thing slipped out of sight quicker than the torch beam moved across surfaces. To my eyes, something was hiding. "I was gone for too long," the patient whispered, drawing our attention. When Dr. Thatcher illuminated the patient's face once again, he had twisted his entire body towards us at an awkward diagonal angle, fingers white-knuckling the edge of the table. Shockingly, 147 had stripped the gown from his body in the few seconds we'd been looking away. He had done so, most unnervingly, with inexplicable speed and silence. And when our colleagues started to blubber more loudly, we understood why they were shivering against the wall in fear. On the patient's right-hand side, his arm and leg were both missing, but they were not bloody stumps. That would have been gruesome and sickening, but all too natural, all too explainable. At the ends of the stumps, each an inch in length, were stapled folds of skin, as if the man's limbs had not been dismembered, but crushed between 2 walls, 2 invisible layers of reality. "Why didn't you let me die?" 147 whimpered. Before Thatcher had a chance to apologize or answer in any way, there came a horror that I will never scrub from my eyes. The very air of the room itself, filled with that dim fog, parted, tore like a wound, creating a hole between the very particles of matter itself. It was not a large tear. It was slight, like a paper cut, less than a hair's width, yet undeniable, a ripple through which I expected that 3-pronged arm to emerge, a shape that I may well have not seen at all, a shape perhaps that may have been false, may have been a visual representation of something for which there exists no visual representation, for it is not designed to be seen by human eyes. It happened so suddenly. Subject 147's remaining limbs were taken by the second wound, clamping down on his skin as he wailed, and then the wounds began to shrink, began to shorten and curl, bending the patient's screeching body forwards, folding 147 into himself. And as fresh rips appeared in the air, flattening what remained of the poor man like a pancake, his lips opened. It was all barely caught by Thatcher's meager torchlight, but we saw enough. Saw too much as the translucent gas slipped from his open lips, only to be swallowed by one final wound. Live as long as you can, were Subject 147's final haunting words. And then the last of his face ceased to be anything at all, leaving nothing on the operating table to prove that he was ever there, not even the gaseous substance that Glenfield would later call his soul. The fog lifted with a large thud, much like the earlier one, and the light returned in the outside hallway, as did the rest of the world. It took us quite some time to go and explore, of course, but we did. And we immediately put an end to all other experiments with remaining deceased subjects. Subject 147 was revived at 2017 p.m. on January 31st, 2025. He disappeared at 2026 p.m. on January 31st, 2025. We don't know what happened to us during that 9-minute period, as security tapes from the laboratory and the main corridor recorded unlit during that time, as if the fog were heavier than we'd imagined. And though we recorded all audio from the experiment, there seems to be some sort of corruption within the file. The sounds of our voices cannot be heard after Doctor. Thatcher instructed Glenfield and me to follow him. In fact, what we do hear doesn't align with what we saw and heard whilst we were in that room. Low whispering in a tongue that doesn't match any language on Earth. Perhaps not whispering at all, some of my colleagues claim. But it sounds like a voice to me, one low and high in pitch, like that awful sound which pushed us into the spatial loop. Subject 147's voice sounded clearly though, the only clear voice in the room. And the microphone recorded words that every doctor is absolutely certain we did not hear the patient say. "Spare them the pit," he cried, moments before folding into nothing. He was talking of that other place. I know it. The place worse than his eternal torture of emptiness. The place that will claim me when I die. Even my terrified mind, I am sure, still falls short of comprehending this afterlife which awaits, a nightmare beyond mortal understanding. And the record suggests that Subject 147 was a good man, no criminal record, no signs of sinful behavior, which religions might blame for his infinite suffering, yet his soul was doomed to exist in a perpetual nothingness of black. Your moral compass means nothing, even if you avoid our mistake, our defiance of nature's laws, and dutifully obey the beings from the great beyond. Who is to say that they will spare you? Who is to say that they are benevolent? Above all else, ask yourself, does a warm, welcoming afterlife even exist? There may be no such thing as resting in peace. We may all be doomed to eternal torture. People don't die, they hide. When I was 10 years old, my brother came home to die on a frigid day in January. Purple lesions ravaged the skin that barely covered his bones. He looked an awful lot like a skeleton, unlike the friendly visitor I had come to know over my short lifetime. My brother Tobias was many years older than me, so I didn't have much of a relationship with him. Still, he made a point to take the train home to New Haven for the holidays, filling our living room with plenty of gifts. One evening, he bought Mom the Fendi baguette she always wanted to show off to her friends at the Junior Women's Club. For my dad's gift, he purchased the George Foreman grill, and all his coworkers at the office buzzed about it. For me, he bought a creepy crawler's oven with liquid and mold containers. The last time he came home, I was excited to show him all the bugs and monsters I made. "You better not," my mom said solemnly when I came home from school one day. My arms were filled with the new batch of miniature reptiles and amphibians I had created. They were a big hit at recess, and I knew Tobias would love them. "He's super tired, honey. I thought they would cheer Toby up." She shook her head and sobbed, drawing a handkerchief to her face. "Honey, we talked about this. Toby is very sick. He won't be able to hear you now." My mom sobbed loudly as my dad slung an arm around her, directing her down the hallway. "Devin, your grandparents are in the living room. Why don't you join them?" These words caused my mom to weep even louder for some reason, as my dad ushered her away. As they reached the living room, I heard the faint words of the live-in hospice nurse, that it wouldn't be long now, and something about hearing the death rattle. When the sobs faded and the conversation died down, I turned the knob to his room as quietly as I could. Standing in the doorway, my heart fluttered. My brother not only looked like a skeleton with his frail exterior and dissolving skin, but like one of the gray aliens I made in my creepy crawler's oven a couple of weeks ago. Unlike the alien, however, he had several tubes attached to him that were hooked up to boxy, beeping machines. His body looked so thin that I swear it started to fade into the sheets of his bed. "Toby?" I said hoarsely. I waited a few minutes before I shouted his name. Toby! Minutes passed before his purple lips quivered and let out an audible groan that dragged on for several seconds. After the groan ended, 6 booming words escaped his lips. Look for me on the walls. A longer groan ensued these words, followed by a long beep from the machine. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as the nurse, my parents, and grandparents rushed into the room. I don't remember much except for shuffling feet, screams, my father whisking me out of the room and closing the door in my face. The adults were in the room for several minutes before my grandmother finally left with her head cast down. She threw her doughy arms around me and said, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Your brother's gone to heaven with the angels. As the other adults came out of the room one by one to hug me, apologize, and sob into my small body, I wondered if I should be crying too. I supposed I loved my brother, but I didn't know him well. To me, he was just that friendly visitor who bought me gifts and read me stories. He popped in and out of my life like some magical elf that appeared only for holidays and disappeared like Santa up the chimney or Frosty the Snowman on a sunny day. I put my hands over my eyes and pretended to cry with them. After a while, I asked if it was okay to go up to my room. My parents permitted me. At once, I hurried up the stairs and slammed the door behind me. For hours, I plopped onto my dinosaur bed sheets and stared at the walls. I stared at the walls for so long that I thought my eyes would bleed. The walls of my room were sponge-painted blue, covered in posters of my favorite baseball players and movies. The shapes on my walls were unmoving. As my eyes drew tears and I yawned, I started to drift off to sleep. My room didn't have any windows, so I couldn't tell whether it was nighttime or not, but I suppose night was nearing by the increasing shadows in the room. Something was strange about these shadows, though. They weren't the typical black or gray, but shades of green. I blinked as green circles danced around my walls like a stage spotlight. Are you awake, Davy boy? A hollow voice echoed. It's time to wake up, Davy boy. Huh? I said, rubbing my eyes. Who are you? You know who, silly. I don't have much time. I blinked twice, and the green circles faded together. All at once, the circles morphed into the shape of a human. The shape looked a little under 6 feet tall, perhaps taller, its figure reaching the brim of the ceiling. Toby? Toby, is that you? Who else, Davy boy? The figure let out a bellowing laugh and stretched atop the ceiling, twisting around the fan in almost a rhythmic pattern. But I thought you were dead? The figure unleashed another bellowing laugh, this time twisting onto the carpeted floor, its green glow matching the soda I spilled the previous day. I thought I would die too, Davy boy, but it's the most unusual thing. You don't go to heaven or hell like we learned in church. Don't tell Mom and Dad, though. Especially not Grandma. I won't, I said, scratching my head. But Toby, if you're not dead, what are you? Hiding. The figure's voice changed from a bellowing pitch to a dull whisper. What do you mean? You must swear not to tell anyone. I swear, Toby, I swear. People don't die, the figure whispered, draining from the carpets back to a small circle on my wall. They hide. From what? I don't know yet, the figure said, its voice now trembling. I just know that we're hiding. We're all hiding. As the figure spoke these words, I saw dozens of green circles bouncing around my walls. They were varying shades of green. Some spoke in whispers like my brother. Others spoke in gibberish that sounded like different languages. I shoved my thumbs into my ear canals as the sounds grew louder and more varied. I jammed my eyelids shut as the lights flickered and burned into my retinas. As I screamed, I heard my brother's voice once more. People don't die, they hide, Devi. They hide and they must never be found. I screamed so loud that my cat Jasper hollered from the other room. I screamed so loud that my mom, dad, grandparents, and even the live-in nurse hurried upstairs and forced their way into my room. It's okay, honey, my mom said, pulling me into her bosom. It's okay, sweetheart, we're all so sad. As the others crowded around me, I continued to scream. Though the sounds had disappeared, I still heard my brother's voice loud and clear. People don't die, they hide. As the days faded into weeks and months, I saw the green circles everywhere, bouncing about the side of buildings, circling the screens of the downtown movie theater, and even on the fence of my backyard. Sometimes the circles morphed into the shapes of humans. Other times they looked like mere reflections. One time during a sleepover, I swore I even saw the circles morph into the shapes of falling bats on the outsides of my tent. I tried not to scream when I saw them. After a while, I tried not to look. When I didn't look, however, I heard their whispers, which usually amounted to nothing but gibberish. As the months faded into years, I checked myself into therapy, the only chance I had to stop seeing the circles, to stop hearing the awful, muffled voices. As a college student, my campus therapist surmised that the shapes and whispers were my way of coping with loss and grief. He assured me that people truly did die, and even took me to the local morgue, which his cousin owned, to show me what a corpse looked like. I admitted that I had never seen my brother's corpse when he died. Seeing the corpses of an old woman and a man as skinny as my brother made me realize how natural death was a part of life. I kept in touch with my therapist after college, and with each passing day, I began to hear the voices even less. For the first time in forever, I could appreciate the sounds of the outdoors that I had taken for granted, even the menial ones like a gust of wind or a child screaming on the playground. For the first time in forever, I could appreciate the laughter of Julia, the girl I took on a first date at the local Starbucks. I loved the sound of her laughter. The sounds of our laughter as we engaged in the silliest conversations. Throughout my life, I heard many wonderful sounds like church bells on my wedding day or the sound of my son Jack crying in my arms. I fell in love with the lights and sounds of my life until the day I started to cough profusely. My wife had taken Jack to daycare as I sat in my home office, typing a draft of my latest article. I felt the urge to cough. A large, bulging urge rising from my chest. As much as I tried to ignore it, I finally unleashed the cough. A cough so powerful that I doubled over onto my desk, spilling blood onto the keyboard. I began to shiver as the blood dripped from my mouth onto the keys and all over the floor. I scrambled to find my cell phone and dial 911. As I continued to convulse, blood, and cry. After I had emptied all of the contents of blood from my stomach, I collapsed onto the floor with the receiver by my ear. 911. What's your emergency? 911. With what little strength I had left, I pushed my body across the floor to the phone. I threw up a lot of blood, I said weakly. I'm sorry about that, sir, the dispatcher said. Many moments passed before she spoke again. Hello? Are you there? Sir, the dispatcher said, her voice suddenly a lot lower and more muffled. You better start thinking about a good place to hide. As the voice began to cackle, a swarm of green circles danced around my body. A stranger approached my car at night with a warning. Check the back seat. I like to think that I take my personal safety very seriously. I don't stand too close to the road while waiting for the walk signal. I have my location shared with my sister and mom. I keep my wits about me when I'm out in public, and I try not to dawdle after getting into my car. If I had only been more diligent about that last rule, I might not be in the situation I'm in now. Early this morning, just after midnight, I was sitting in my parked car outside of my favorite grocery store. I was exhausted from picking up a friend's evening shift, and so I stopped to grab dinner on my way home from work. The store is in an isolated part of town, but I had never felt unsafe in the area. Then again, I had never been so late at night. The second I exited the store with my purchase, the old cashier closed up shop for the night and turned off all the lights in the building. For some reason, I did something I never do. I started eating in my car. As a precaution, I try not to linger in isolated parking lots, especially as a young woman who often has to run errands after dark. Maybe it was the hunger, or maybe the fact that due to a recent breakup, my house hasn't felt all that welcoming in the past few weeks. In any case, I was in no rush to return home. I pulled up an episode of The Terror on my phone and settled in to eat. I enjoyed a few minutes of blissful peace and quiet before a shout pierced through the night. I looked up from my phone and was surprised to find a woman standing in front of my car, waving her arms at me. My car was parked right in front of the store, facing towards the building, and there was only a thin sidewalk separating my vehicle from the store's exterior. I hadn't seen her coming at all. It was like she had emerged from the brick wall before me. She rounded my car, coming to a stop beside the driver's side window. She then started pointing at the ground, the universal signal for roll your window down. Fat chance, I thought. Though she looked sane and kempt, I had no clue what her intentions were. In fact, I felt pretty vindicated in always locking my car doors immediately after entering. The woman, perhaps seeing I was making no move to exit my vehicle, then told me something no one wants to hear. "Hey!" she shouted. "There's someone in your back seat." My mouth went dry. Time seemed to slow as 1,000 horror movie scenes raced through my head. I could almost feel the piano wire digging into my neck, the barrel pressing into my temple. I undid my seatbelt and prepared to launch myself out of the car. Now that the intruder knew I was aware of their presence, would I even have enough time to run? With one hand on the door handle, I stole a glance into the rearview mirror and saw no one. My car is a compact hatchback, meaning there's very little room for a person to hide in my cabin. Even in my exhausted state, I would have noticed someone upon looking into the mirror. My terror fading to confusion, I turned around in my seat, surveying the cabin with my own eyes, and confirmed that there was no one in my back seat. Click. When I turned back around, the woman had taken another step closer to my car. Her body was barely a foot from my door and her fingers were wrapped around the handle. There were a few more deep clicks as she tried, unsuccessfully, to open the locked door. I raised my gaze and she gave me an odd smile, as though she and I were sharing a private joke. For the first time, using the faint glow of the street lamp, I took a closer look at the woman's face. Her skin was stretched tightly across her skull, making her thin mouth and nostrils appear as though they'd been cut onto her. Her eyes were deep set and ovate, and her teeth seemed both too small and too numerous. I allowed myself a brief moment to gawk at the face before me, and then I threw my car into reverse and hightailed it out of the lot. For a few disheartening seconds, the woman held onto the door, keeping in step with my vehicle as I backed up. Luckily, she soon let go, and I drove away, my mind racing with the realization that the woman was trying to bait me out of my car. Even more disturbing was the fact that it had almost worked. I wondered if she had others with her that I simply hadn't seen, and what she had wanted from me. I hoped I had narrowly escaped a robbery as opposed to something much more sinister. I got back to my house 20 minutes later. Still shaken from my encounter, I rushed inside the house and made sure that all of my doors and windows were locked. My exhaustion did little to soothe my nerves. My mind played tricks on me as I got ready for bed, conjuring up flashes of the woman's face in the dark corners of my house. Once I finally fell asleep, my fears followed me from the waking world. I had a long, vivid nightmare, most of which I've either forgotten or is irrelevant to this account. All I know is that when I jolted awake some hours later, it was to the sound of a frantic banging on my front door. I sat up in bed, unsure if I was still dreaming or not. My alarm clock read 4:17. It was far too early for someone to be knocking on my door unless there was some kind of emergency, which, given the forcefulness of the knocks, there may have been. Slowly, I rose from my bed and inched towards the entryway. I had never before been in such a situation and was at somewhat of a loss as to how to react. I didn't smell a fire, thankfully, but that didn't mean all was well. Suddenly, I heard a man's voice calling out my name in a questioning tone. It sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. "Who is it?" I called back. "Brian," answered the disembodied voice, and relief washed over me. My neighbor, Brian, lived in the house across the street. We weren't close exactly, but I often saw him walking down the block with his dog, Bailey. I turned on the entryway light, but as I was still in my sleepwear, I didn't want to open the door unless I had to. Instead, I called back to him. "What's the matter?" "Well," he began. I heard his voice crack, and he cleared his throat. "Do you have someone over right now?" "What?" I asked, my heart skipping a beat. "No, I don't. Why do you ask?" "Well, the dog had to go out, and while I was in the yard with him, I thought I saw someone in your front window. Someone who didn't look quite right." I stilled, feeling as though I were in some terrible dream. Turning around and glancing down the dark hallway, I wished I had turned on more lights on my way to answer the door. "She followed you home," I thought. "She's in your house with you right now." I was ready to bolt out the door into the cold, but by some miracle, I had just enough presence of mind left to consider my neighbor's words more carefully. Something was wrong. I stepped away from the door. "Are you all right, Brian?" He cleared his throat again, and when he next spoke, his voice sounded slightly different from before, as though he were testing out a new timbre. "Of course, I just got a bit of a cold here, but I still wanted to check in on you." My voice wavered as I voiced a question to my neighbor. "But your dog, isn't it a girl?" Brian didn't respond. My mind reeled in the torturous silence, trying to discern whether the threat was outside the door or inside the house with me. After a full minute of complete stillness, the handle to my front door began to move. It rotated downwards as far as it could before the lock stopped it, then shook as the person on the other side of my door pulled on the handle. This happened several more times as the person tested my lock, and then there was a powerful bang, as though someone had rammed into my door with all their might. After that, there was silence again. I stood frozen in place for another minute. I had no peephole, but I worked up the nerve to walk into the living room and peer through the blinds into my front yard. In the distance, walking down the street away from my house, was a figure. Although I couldn't see the face, something deep within me knew it was the same person who had tried to open my car door. I watched her walk away into the quiet night until she disappeared from my view. Needless to say, I didn't get much sleep for the rest of the night. I split my time between roaming the perimeter of my house, looking for anything suspicious, and sitting in my kitchen running the events of the night over in my mind. The most likely explanation was that I'd been dreaming. After all, I'd nearly been baited into opening my door to a potential criminal just hours before, so it made sense that I'd have a nightmare about a similar situation. The Then again, I had never in my entire life had a dream so vivid. Maybe somehow the woman really did follow me home. She easily could have stuck a tracker on my car, but how in the world did she know Brian's name? And how had she impersonated him so well? The sun is setting now. I haven't left the house all day. I've been too haunted by the idea of someone, or multiple someones, trying to draw me out into the open. No matter how many times I check the house, I still feel as though I catch glimpses of the woman in my periphery, of her beady eyes and uncanny smile. I suppose I should try to get some sleep now. Impossible as that seems at this point. I just needed to jot this down before I went to bed, in case A, anything happens to me, and B, you ever think about blindly trusting the warnings of a stranger. I'm a cop, was a cop. I'm resigning. Fuck this job. I never thought I'd say that to curse the career I'd loved for the past 12 years. But here I am, ready to kiss it all goodbye. I'm not going to show up to work today, not after what happened last night. It was 1:45 to midnight when I got the call, a domestic disturbance on the 1500 block. It was a slow night. I'd been sitting in my cruiser for most of it, so having something to do was relieving. The call didn't seem too urgent. A neighbor reported hearing a woman screaming down the hall of her apartment building. Most of the time, these calls never amount to anything, usually turning out to be a mother reprimanding her unruly children, or a husband getting an earful from his angry wife. God knows I know what that is like. I didn't even turn on my sirens when I pulled out into the road. I pulled up to the apartment complex and reported my status to dispatch. The radio sputtered, and the woman on the other end confirmed my arrival. The static of her voice echoed through the night. There were a few curious eyes looking through the windows, nosy neighbors ready to see why a police cruiser was in the parking lot. I tried ignoring them, but even after all these years, it always unsettled me to be the messenger of malice, like the retreating dark clouds after a torrential downpour. I walked down the hall and the blinds closed as the bad omen strutted past the glass. I tried not to take it to heart, but it gets to you sometimes. I reached the stairs and made my way up to the 3rd floor. The hall was dark. A few pothole lights illuminated the passageway. They buzzed overhead with an electric hum, ready to burn out at any second. Although no one was watching me through the windows on this floor, I still felt like someone was there. There was a primal uneasiness that was making the hairs on my neck stand on end. Walking forward, the clinking of my shoes on the concrete, an ungraceful presence and an eerie calmness. I found myself fighting not to put a hand over my holstered pistol. I couldn't be the trigger-happy cop, the rotten eggs you see in the news, but I still had my fist clenched by my side. I'm a grown man, but I'm still wary of the monsters that lurk in the dark. Only after all these years, I've learned that people are the root of all evil. The father who abuses his children, the murderer who kills out of spite, the old lady with a murderous twinkle in her eyes. She was watching me through a crack in the door, her undulating eyes screaming bloody murder. It startled the hell out of me when I saw her. I hadn't even heard the door creak open. She whispered to me, beckoning me over with her gnarled, arthritic finger. My stomach was in knots. Something told me not to get closer. There was a vitriol disgust in my mouth, like looking at the necrotic flesh of a dying animal. Maybe it was her balding, unkempt hair, or the toothless, gritted mouth, but she didn't seem too friendly. But I had an obligation to step forward, to help anyone in need, and by the state of her gaunt face, this woman needed my help. Her voice was shaky, a mix of fear and malnutrition. What the hell took you so long? I was confused by her question. Fear was slowing my mind, but when I looked at the number on the door, I made the connection. This was the address that had placed the 911 call. I composed myself and asked her the details of the situation, but she shushed me, telling me to keep quiet. She looked down the hall, making sure that no one had heard us. She nearly closed the door in my face when one of the lights overhead flickered. Her eyes pleaded for me to come closer. I hesitated, but obliged. It's down the hall, it's watching us. I felt my chest flutter at the ominous tone in her voice. A horrendous screech made its way down the corridor and almost knocked me on my ass. The old woman slammed the door, and I finally had my hand on my gun. On the far end of the hall, crouched at an intersecting passage, a woman, naked and bare, trembling like a stray dog. My left hand reached for my flashlight, but I had a hard time turning it on, instinct telling me not to look at the sickly figure caressing its knees. But I flipped the switch, the hall glowing a bright white as the woman was suddenly in the spotlight. She looked like she was crying, rocking back and forth, hair draped over her face. Yet there was no whimpering. I called out, asking her if everything was okay, as if I already didn't know. She looked famished, skin and bones, her ribs visible through her chest. I took a step, her body shuddered as my foot struck the ground. I assured her that everything was okay. I'm not sure who I was trying to comfort, her or myself. I reached for my radio, pinned to my chest, and requested EMS But dispatch didn't respond, no one was there, and the woman had stopped shivering. For some reason, I felt like I just stepped on a pressure-sensitive landmine, and the moment I moved, I was done for. I tried swallowing the lump in my throat, but my mouth was dry. The air was stale, toxic, and I didn't know why. The woman's chest was pulsating, panting. I shifted on my foot, not taking a step, but just enough to disturb the fuse on the bottom of my soul. The woman lifted her head, and I caught a glimpse of what her hair was masking. Her mouth was stitched shut. Globulets of blood dribbled off her chin. I couldn't see her eyes, still hidden behind her bangs, but the way the crimson tears streamed down her face, I knew they were also sewed. The woman perched herself on the floor, and I found my pistol already in my hand. I stepped back, off the mine, and the woman ran at me. I dropped the flashlight and opened fire, the muzzle blast giving me still images of the woman barreling towards me. I know I struck her a few times. I saw the bullets cutting through her flesh, but she kept on coming. My finger was automatically pressing the trigger, and before long I'd emptied my clip. The last still image I saw was on the ground, and the woman was standing over me. I'd struck a few lights in the exchange, and now my dropped flashlight was the only thing piercing the darkness. I scrambled for the flashlight and turned it to the woman, but she was gone. I heard the door slam shut, and I violently panned to the source of the sound. I managed to catch the woman's foot disappearing behind a door, the same door that belonged to the old woman. I frantically reached for the extra clip on my belt, reloaded my weapon, and tried radioing for backup. I was relieved when someone actually answered this time. "Shots fired, I said. Almost instantly, I heard the sirens howling in the distance. But that wasn't the only thing that howled. From the other side of the door, the old woman was pleading for help. Her muted screams filled me with a contradicting resolve. "Help was on the way," I shouted through the door. The woman screamed as her voice gargled with the sound of death. I knew she was dying. I knew she wouldn't make it until backup arrived. I nearly pulled out my hair as I wrestled with my conscience. Unconsciously, I was already kicking the door down. "I'm dying," the woman screamed. The door started to buckle as I heard the squelch of her flesh getting torn apart. "Help me, please, I'm dying." The door finally let go. The room instantly went quiet. "Police, come on out." I tried to sound authoritative, but my voice was quivering. I panned the light as I walked into the living room and found the old woman standing in a corner, her back toward me. "Show me your hands," I commanded. The woman didn't move. I cautiously made my way to her and nuzzled my gun into her shoulder. Still, she didn't move. There was a lamp on the other side of the room that shattered on the ground, and I frantically looked in that direction. Behind the couch, a person's hands gripped the fabric. I knew who it was. "Hands, show me your fucking hands." The woman let go of her hold on the couch, her spine unfurling like a serpent, readying itself to strike. The stitches that once kept her mouth shut were now ripped apart and hanging off her face, though her eyes remained closed. She opened her mouth, showing me her teeth. They were filed down to a point, all of them. She hissed, and I raised a shaky gun toward her face. "Get on the ground," I yelled. That was when a pair of teeth sunk into my neck. It was the old woman. She had latched onto my skin, her once gummy mouth now riddled with jagged fangs. The woman from the hall just stood there, listening to me fight to get the hag off my neck. I bashed her head with the butt of my flashlight, thunked her with my fist, pulling out clumps of hair with my hands, but nothing loosened her jaw. I heard the swashing of my blood as she sucked it into her mouth. My legs were starting to go limp, my vision hazy, and I was losing consciousness. The world started distancing itself. I was drifting away, dying, my body growing cold, my heartbeats becoming hollow. I dropped the flashlight. That was the last time I saw the light. My eyes no longer worked, but I saw everything, heard everything. The spiders weaving their cobwebs in the corner, their mouths smacking as they shaped their masterpieces. I felt the earth turning underneath me, the cold midnight air, the heat of the day cresting the horizon somewhere in the east. I felt the building growing old, the wooden boards in the walls slowly rotting, withering away. That was when I saw them, all of them. The apartment complex should have been teeming with life, the units filled with a rhythmic flurry of heartbeats. But the only thing I heard was the growling of their stomachs, as they pressed an ear to the walls, as the old woman fed on my body, as my blood drained into her mouth. My heart pumped for the last time, and I no longer felt physical pain, but dread started coursing through my veins when a car's brakes squealed into the parking lot. Help had arrived. The two women retreated into the hall, leaving me on the floor. It wasn't long until a radio sputtered from down the hall, and an officer walked into the room. Moments ago, he would have been my saving grace, but now I was his demise. His arteries pulsated in his neck. I wanted to sink my teeth into his skin, to refill the void the old woman had left behind, but I couldn't. I knew this man. He was a friend. I couldn't do to him what had been done to me. Suddenly, the building was empty. While I was listening to the thudding of my buddy's heart in his chest, The things in the building had managed to scurry away. They were gone. Dozens of officers arrived and taped off the area. They sat me in the back of an ambulance where they tried to take my vitals. I refused, telling them I was okay. They took my service pistol, a standard precaution after an officer discharged his gun. I know I will be on desk duty for a while as they investigate me for discharging my gun, but I'm not sure if I could sit in a room filled with a dozen beating hearts. I came home last night to find my worried wife waiting for me at the door. Someone from work had given her a call and told her that I was shaken up, but okay. I smelled the anguish in her blood. It gave her copper-scented flesh a tinge of saltiness. She hugged me and tried to kiss me, but I pulled away. I would have sunk my teeth on her lips if she had. I sat on the couch all night, fighting not to tear my wife's neck open, but the longer I fought, the worse my stomach growled. A taste wouldn't hurt. I stood over her trying to restrain myself, but found myself tracing my tongue on her skin. She playfully pushed me away, caressing the back of my head. I lost control. The next thing I knew, she was lying lifelessly underneath me. I waited for her to wake up just as I did, but for some reason, she didn't. She was gone. I'd killed her. My body was momentarily replenished, but at what cost? I was already growing hungry again, and the love of my life was gone. This was supposed to be my suicide note, but when I put a bullet in my mouth, it didn't work. I want to die. I don't want to live like this, to be this thing, this monstrosity. Someone is going to come looking for me when I don't show up for work tonight. I don't want to hurt anyone else, but as time drones on, I'm conflicted. Now, I'm not sure if I want them to stay away, or if I want someone to come asking questions. I don't think I can restrain myself if they do. I'm not sure I want to restrain myself. I can't get rid of the flies in my house. I'd been living in the old Victorian for 6 months when I first noticed the flies. They congregated in the corner of the study, a fist-sized stain on the faded Persian carpet that seemed to pulse with them. No matter how many times I sprayed insecticide or laid traps, they returned, droning, persistent, their bodies glinting like obsidian beads in the sunlight. The previous owner had warned me the house had quirks, but this felt deliberate, as though the stain was so delicious to them that they couldn't help but gather there. One sweltering July afternoon, I snapped. "Fuck it, I'll just replace it," I mumbled as I tore the carpet up with a crowbar. Sweat dripped down my neck as I removed the culprit section of the carpet. Beneath the moth-eaten fabric was a patch of warped hardwood covered in maggots, its edges blackened as if scorched. "What the fuck?" I said to myself in disgust. A single floorboard sat slightly raised like a crooked tooth. I pried it loose with a crowbar, half expecting to find human remains underneath, but instead there, in the hollow beneath, lay a book. It wasn't like the gothic grimoires from movies. This was small. Kind of like those pocket Bibles you find in hotel rooms. It was bound in cracked suede, the color of dried blood, and its pages were yellowed and brittle. The symbols inside weren't Latin. They squirmed, shifting under my gaze like centipedes. Yet somehow I understood them. A chant whispered in my mind, sweet and coaxing. "Speak me and I'll make the flies go away." I laughed, a nervous, breathy sound. What harm could it do? That night, with a bottle of bourbon as my courage, I knelt over the floorboard hollow and recited the words aloud. The air turned syrupy, smelling of wet soil and rotting fruit. Then came the voice, smooth as oil, amused. Ah, a pragmatist. The man who materialized before me was ordinary, mid-30s, unshaven, dressed in a rumpled linen shirt and slacks. His eyes were the only oddity, pale green, flecked with gold, like sunlight through a swamp. He gestured to the stain on the floor. "Flies, right? Nasty business. Let's fix that." A snap of his fingers, and the insects crumbled to ash. What are you?" I stammered. "A problem solver," he said, grinning. "Call me Baz, and you, my friend, just earned yourself a favor." Over the next week, Baz became a fixture. He fixed the leaking roof, unclogged the septic tank, even brewed a mean cup of coffee. He joked about modern life, lamented the paperwork of his job, and never once mentioned demons or souls. To be honest, I actually kind of enjoyed his company, but after a few more days, I grew suspicious of his helpfulness, eventually driving me to ask what he wanted in return. "Seriously though, Baz, why are you doing all of this?" He waved me off. "Consider it a housewarming gift. But if you're feeling generous, a little signature wouldn't hurt." He produced a simple receipt, no different from one you'd get from a convenience store. "You see, I'm somewhat of a handyman, and all I need is a signature right here at the bottom. Standard stuff, acknowledgement of services rendered." I should have read it, but the flies were gone. The house was warm. Finally, mine. I scribbled my name. The moment the ink dried, Baz's skin split. His body erupted into a mass of writhing maggots, eyes boiling into pus-yellow orbs. Wings, translucent, veined, sprouted from his back, buzzing with the sound of 1,000 flies. The voice that emerged was a chorus of screams. Souls are so much sweeter when given, not taken, Beelzebub crooned, a clawed hand pressing over my chest. Coldness spread, my breath frosting in the air. Don't look so grim. You'll live a long, happy life until I come to collect. The lights flickered and he vanished, leaving the stench of sulfur. I tried to burn the grimoire. It wouldn't catch fire. Now, when I wake at 3 a.m., I hear him laughing in the walls, a sound like broken glass and wings. The flies are back too, but now they follow me around. It's been 2 years since the last time I saw Baz, and I pray it was all just a bad dream. But just as I start to drift off to sleep, I hear a buzzing next to my ear. I fucking hate flies.